Chapter 7, Skeletal System, Bone Structure and Function, Part 1. So, basic components of the skeletal system. Well, they include, of course, the bones themselves that make up the skeleton. It also includes cartilage, cartilage that lies on the surface of bones, and the cartilage found between bones. It includes the ligaments that attach bones to bones, and some other connective tissues important for the skeletal system. So there are two main kinds of bone tissue. You have compact bone, which is relatively dense, appears pretty white, it's smooth, it's solid. It is superficially located on the bones, so it's the outer tissue of bones. And it's very heavy, so it makes up 80% of the bone mass. And then you have the spongy bone. The spongy bone is internal bone tissue, so it is deep to the compact bone. It appears very porous with lots of spaces between the bone tissue, and it's about 20% of the bone mass. And every bone has both tissues, the compact bone on the outside, the spongy bone on the inside. Cartilage, there are three main kinds of cartilage that we're familiar with. There's the elastic cartilages that, for instance, help to make up the internal structure of the external ear. You have the hyaline cartilage, which is found at the ends of bones and found within the nose and between some joints. And then you have the fibrocartilage, which is found as the intervertebral discs between the vertebra, the piece of cartilage connecting the hip bones and the pubic symphysis, and as the menisci in the knee joint. Cartilage is semi-rigid, so it is a bit weaker, a bit squishier than bone tissue, but it is rather flexible and resilient, which is good. Cartilage is avascular. There are no blood vessels within the cartilage itself. The main cells that produce the cartilage's external material is the chondroblasts, and then within the cartilage are chondrocytes that are the living cells of the cartilage, specifically in little structures called lacuna for one, lacunae for many. Hyaline cartilage is attached to the ribs to the sternum, covers the ends of the bones at mobile joints, forms the growth plates for our bones, and is what forms the embryonic model before bones are produced by the embryo. Fibrocartilage is very weight-bearing cartilage. It can withstand compression. It has lots and lots of collagen fibers. It is found again in the intervertebral discs, the pubic symphysis, and in the cartilage pads for some joints. We also have dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue is the tissue of the tendons that attach the muscles to the bones and the ligaments that attach bones to bones. All right, what are some important functions? Well, obviously, the skeleton provides the framework for our body, and in so it helps to support various structures of the body, such as the brain, organs within the torso, and provide protection for those organs. So the skull protects the brain, the thoracic cage protects the lungs, the heart. The bones are also involved in movement, specifically movement caused by the skeletal muscles. Hemiopoiesis, the bones, red bone marrow are where all blood cells are produced. And then storage of minerals and energy reserves. The bone tissue itself is hard because it's storing calcium and phosphate. And then the yellow bone marrow found in some bones stores triglycerides as an energy reserve. The bones, again, provide structural support, framework for the body, protect delicate structures, the heart, the lungs, liver, stomach, spleen, a little bit by the rib cage. Cranial bones protect the brain, vertebrae protect the spinal cord, pelvis protects the urinary bladder, the ovaries. Movement, again, attachment sites for various muscles. Some soft tissues and organs also attach directly to the bones. When movement occurs, the bones are acting as rigid levers that the skeletal muscles are able to exert a force on, causing movement. And the joints can help the bones alter the direction and force generated by those muscles. Again, hemiopoiesis, production of all blood cells. This occurs in the red bone marrow, where there are these multipotent stem cells that lead to all of our blood cells. Again, we store in the bones calcium and phosphate, and they are released as needed into the bloodstream or removed from the bloodstream. Calcium is very important. It's important for muscles to contract, for blood clotting to occur, and for nerve impulse transmission to occur. So calcium, a very critical mineral of the body. The phosphate, also important. Phosphate is needed in the production of ATP and use of ATP by our cells, and also is used to form the phospholipids in the plasma membrane. And of course, the triglycerides, those lipids, are stored as an energy source in the shafts of adult bones. Turns out there are 4 classes of bones by shape. We have the long bones, as shown here, with a long shaft. They're longer than they are wide. We have the short bones, no shaft, kind of blocky in shape. We have the flat bones. Flat bones are thin, sort of like a slice of bread. And then the irregular bones are the bones that have a rather unusual shape. Here is an example of a long bone. This is specifically a femur. And we're going to look at the gross anatomy of long bones. So you can chop up the long bone into 5 pieces. You have the proximal epiphysis, includes the smooth ends of the bone. It's going to form a joint. You have the proximal metaphysis. Then you have the diaphysis, which is the long shaft of the long bone. Then you have a distal metaphysis, followed by the distal epiphysis, where, again, you have smooth ends that will form joints. Within the diaphysis, you have the space referred to as the medullary cavity. Now, there is compact bone, again, is the exterior bone tissue for the bone, and then the internal bone tissue is the spongy bone tissue. Found mixed in with the spongy bone tissue is where we find the red bone marrow. We also have cartilages. We have the articular cartilage, that is hyaline cartilage that lies on the smooth ends of bones where they form mobile joints. And then we also, in children, have what's referred to as an epiphyseal plate composed of hyaline cartilage. That is where the growth in length occurs for the bones of children. However, as the children become adults, that epiphyseal plate will calcify and becomes the epiphyseal line. So in adults, we have epiphyseal line. Children, they have epiphyseal plates. In the medullary cavity, we will find the yellow bone marrow for adults. Also, there will be a nutrient artery and vein that will enter and exit the diaphysis through a nutrient foramen. Foramen means hole. So it's a hole where a very large artery enters and a very large vein exits, providing the blood vessels, the blood for the diaphysis of the long bone. Surrounding the outside of the bone, lying on its surface, is the periosteum. Periosteum covers all of the external surface of the bone except where the articular cartilage is. And then on the inside of the bone lies the endosteum. So all the inner surfaces of the bone tissue is covered by the endosteum. The periosteum on the outside has 2 different layers. You have the fibrous layer, which is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. It surrounds the bone, helps to provide some protection to the bone, but primarily it anchors blood vessels and nerves to the surface of the bone, and is also a great attachment site for ligaments and tendons. Then there's also an inner layer or cellular layer. That thinner cellular layer is where we find the bone cells, such as the osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. There are also collagen fibers going from the fibrous layer into the bone itself. This attaches the periosteum to the bone. So again, the collagen fibers go from the fibrous layer of the periosteum into the bone itself. Endosteum is found on the inside, lining all the bone tissue. It is only composed of the cellular layer. So it has the osteoprogenitor cells, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. Other bones, the short bones, flat bones, and irregular bones, they all do not have a diaphysis. They have no shaft. They do have external compact bone, internal spongy bone. There's no medullary cavity because, again, there's no diaphysis. And they do indeed have the periosteum covering the surface, external surface of the bones, and the endosteum on the inside, covering inside the bones. Red bone marrow. Red bone marrow is hemopoietic, so it produces the blood cells, all of the blood cells that we need. It's composed of the reticular connective tissue that forms a mesh, and attached to that mesh are immature blood cells, the stem cells that produce the blood cells, and also some adipose tissue. In children, red bone marrow also fills the medullary cavities, so children have very little to no yellow bone marrow. In adults, we primarily only have the red bone marrow in the bones of the axial skeleton, so the skull, the vertebrae, ribs, sternum, os cocci, and also the proximal epiphyses of the humerus and femur. Yellow bone marrow basically replaces the red bone marrow as we become adults. It stores adipose tissue, which, as we know, is a fatty material. And in rare cases, if someone's suffering from severe anemia, the red bone marrow can reform, can replace yellow bone marrow, but that only occurs in extreme situations. All right, bone marrow transplants. It turns out that we are able to take the multipotent stem cells that found in the red bone marrow from someone who's healthy and transplant that injected into bloodstream of the recipient. So someone who's had their red bone marrow destroyed or is functioning abnormally, either because they're destroying the bone marrow to get rid of, say, leukemia or some other health issue, can get a replacement red bone marrow from a healthy donor that is matched very closely to the recipient. We need a good match between the donor and the recipient. This is so that the immune system of the recipient doesn't destroy the donor's cells, and also so that the new white blood cells produced by the donor tissue doesn't attack the recipient's body. So it has to be a very good tight match. All right, histology. There are 4 kinds of bone cells. There's the osteoprogenitor cells. These are stem cells, and they divide, and some of them mature to become osteoblasts. So osteoprogenitor cells, some of them divide, mature, become osteoblasts. They are again found in the periosteum and endosteum. The osteoblasts are very important because they synthesize and secrete the osteoid. That is the organic matrix of the bones. So they produce the semi-solid organic matrix that then later becomes calcified. And then when osteoblasts get surrounded by this matrix that they're producing, they can differentiate to become osteocytes. So osteoprogenitor cells become osteoblasts. Osteoblasts, when surrounded by tissue, bone tissue, becomes osteocytes. And osteocytes are mature bone cells. They do not produce organic material, but they do help to maintain healthy bone tissue. They are aware of mechanical stresses to bone tissue, and if there are mechanical stresses, they then send out signals that trigger osteoblasts to produce more bone matrix in those areas. And then we have the osteoclasts. Osteoclasts come from a different lineage. Osteoclasts are large multinuclear cells. They have a ruffled border that gives them a large surface area exposed to the bone tissue. And then they usually form in or near depression pits. And basically, they are breaking down the matrix. They're breaking down the bone's tissue through the release of enzymes from lysosomes. And in the process of this occurring, they also lead to the release of calcium and phosphate back into the bone. So osteoblasts pull calcium and phosphate from the blood. Osteoclasts release it. The bone has organic material. That osteoid is made up of collagen proteins and semi-solid ground matrix, ground substance. This gives the bone its strength by allowing it to resist stretching and contributes to its flexibility. And that's it for this part of the